Ready?
Mhm.
Okay. So I call to order the special Board of Education meeting on July 14th, 2022 at 6:32 p.m. in the boardroom of OPRF High School, and would like a roll call.
Sarah Spivey,
Here.
Dr. Maharaj,
Here.
Mr. Arkin,
Here.
Mr. Henry,
Here.
Mr. Martieri,
Here.
Ms. Harris, Mr. Costi.
Here. It says the next is to approve the minutes. Huh?
That's the one that will be approved at the next meeting. So you can skip that.
Yeah, we'll skip that.
Yep.
So I move to enter closed session for the purpose of discussing the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees of the district or legal counsel for the district and independent contractors and specific volunteers, including hearing testimony on a complaint lodged against an employee or against legal counsel for the district to determine its validity, and collective negotiating matters between the district and its employees or their representatives or deliberations concerning salary schedules for one or more classes of employees. May I have a second?
Second.
And may we have a roll call?
Dr. Maharaj,
Yes.
Mr. Arkin,
Yes.
Mr. Henry,
Yes.
Mr. Martieri,
Yes.
Ms. Spivey,
Yes.
Mr. Costi.
Yes. Okay. So we will now leave and flip into closed session Zoom.
Recording in progress.
Okay. So we will resume open session and next on our agenda is public comments. And Lisa, you said there was one comment submitted
Into
into the
minutes.
minutes for review by the board.
Mhm. No
Okay.
public comments, no in-person.
Does anyone present want to make public comment?
No. No in-person.
Okay, just give them a chance.
Oh, okay.
I don't want to sing and dance or, okay. Then we will move on to our action items. And our first action item tonight is I move to approve the following, which is approval of the personnel recommendations, including new hires, transfers, and resignations as amended in closed session. May I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, we are doing these are not,
One by one.
not consent, so we're doing them one by one. A roll call, please?
Mr. Arkin,
Yes.
Mr. Henry,
Yes.
Mr. Martieri,
Yes.
Ms. Spivey,
Yes.
Dr. Maharaj,
Yes.
Mr. Costa.
Yes. Thank you. I move for approval policies for second read. Need a second.
Second.
Any comments? Or I just would like to say, a board goal was to put in place a sustainability policy, and so this culminates. This is completion of that work. So keep moving. Roll call, please.
Mr. Henry,
Yes.
Mr. Martieri,
Yes.
Ms. Spivey,
Yes.
Dr. Maharaj,
Yes.
Mr. Arkin,
Yes.
Mr. Costa.
Yes. I move for the presentation of the May 2022 monthly financial report as presented, and can we do a double? And
Yeah, we can.
the treasurer's report as presented, and the triple, and the July 22 check disbursements and financial resolutions as presented. May I have a second?
I need 3 seconds.
3 seconds. Okay. Any discussion or comments on those? Okay.
Mr. Martieri,
Yes.
Ms. Spivey,
Yes.
Dr. Maharaj,
Yes.
Mr. Arkin,
Yes.
Mr. Henry,
Yes.
Mr. Costa.
Yes. I move to accept with gratitude the following donations. Good Heart Work Smart donation of $5,000 to the Spoken Word Club in honor of recently retired teacher and club sponsor Peter Kahn, and Mr. Jeff Kelly's donation to the theater department, his collection of costumes, which includes period pieces, beaded and sequin design wear, uniforms, tuxes, and I might use the tux, and professionally made costumes from theaters all over the country, as well as accessories such as jewelry, hats, purses, and footwear. Can I have a second? Thank you. May we have a roll call?
Mr. Arkin,
Yes.
Mr. Henry,
Yes.
Ms. Spivey,
Yes.
Dr. Maharaj,
Yes.
Mr. Martieri,
Yes.
Mr. Costa.
Yes. I move to approve the data sharing agreement with Housing Forward from July 3, 2022 through July 30, 2023. May I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? I just have one comment, which has been, we've had it for other things, when a contract of this is brought forth, what are we, renewing, and what has occurred? What's been the success or use of what we've done that is causing us to consider renewing it? So could you just provide a
Yes.
2-second update?
Yeah, I will. So this is really a benefit to our homeless families who are most in need, to connect them immediately to resources and provide. Now, with that said, what has happened over the past school year in particular, zero. We have not had any families who have been identified that we have referred to the program whose families have consented to data share with Housing Forward. Now, with that said, there's no financial risk for the district, and so it's an agreement that we want to continue to engage in for the future. But as of right now, it hasn't been one that in the immediate past has resulted in any specific benefits.
Okay, thank you for that.
Sorry, I have one question. Why are we only doing this for a year? I mean, is there a reason that we didn't do it for a longer period given?
This was their recommendation in renewing it to do it for a year. So why they didn't want to do it longer, I'd have to go back and figure out exactly what their thinking was. I will tell you that the fact that we haven't had students who have benefited from it is likely, a strong answer to that question, at least as we're concerned. There's a lot of questions about exactly how this data gets shared and privacy situations and all that. And so I think there are perhaps some concerns with families about sharing such data for this benefit. So we'll just have to see how it continues to go. So, but in order to get a better answer from their perspective, I'd have to reach out.
Thank you. May we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Arkin,
Yes.
Mr. Henry,
Yes.
Mr. Martyri,
yes,
Ms. Spivey,
Yes.
Dr. Boneraj,
Yes.
Mr. Costi.
Yes. Next is the approval of the Menda contract for 2022-23 school year for the amount of $143,000.
Yeah, I think we should do them one at a time, but I appreciate you asking the question because this is linked conceptually and service-wise to the ombudsman contract, which immediately follows on the agenda. And so Ms. Parker is here, and Ms. Parker, I'm going to ask you if you could give an overview.
Can I just, maybe we have a second for the motion, and then we'll go.
Second.
No, perfect, understood, thank you. So could you give us an overview of what exactly this change is? Why you're making the change as to how we're providing this service to our students and kind of what it entails. And then if you could also detail why and how it works as financially for the district when you consider the two together.
Yes. Yes, good evening, everyone. So this past year, we used Menda solely as our alternative education program for our students. And students from the general education side of school are actually, they go to Menda through permission from their parents if there are recommendations from the PSS teams to do so. It's very rare in school, but when we notice that it's like the academic environment here at the school is not working, we want to provide a setting where schooling may be more easy, not easier, but actually something place where they can thrive. So we've been using Menda, and in the data that I gave you in the report, it shows in terms of student attendance rates and how things were going in terms of credits earned. And I decided to dive a little bit deeper in that this year because I was concerned about the rate of attendance for some of our students and just trying to find out if these wraparound services are happening for students, then what's happening in terms of students accessing them and actually being successful at the school. What I determined is that though we are sending students there who the wraparound services may benefit, we are also sending students there where that might not still be the setting that's the best for them. In some situations, credit recovery is what a student needs, And what I'm noticing in terms of just the price difference between the two places that I found, we could be paying at Menda for the wraparound services that students are not accessing because they're still not thriving in that environment. And that was a concern to me. And so what I wanted to do was still offer Menda as an opportunity for those who could benefit, because we do have some students who thrive there, but then also have an opportunity for students who just need credit recovery so that they can get their diploma and move on with their lives and have their diploma from school. And that is what Ombudsman offers us, which is why we have the two. And so what I'm working with our PSS teams on this year is identifying what students truly need and which environment is going to be the best of service to them. And so that is the two. Just to answer the question about the cost difference, it costs for an entire year $22,880 to send a student for the year to Menda. This year, the cost of that contract went to $130 per pupil per day, which is a 34% rise from where we were last year. And the cost to send a student to Ombudsman for the year is $7,000 for the year. They are different programs, they offer different services, so they are not apples to apples, but again, it's about the service that the student needs and not hindering that student from earning the credits they need in order to graduate. And so that's what we're trying to do with the two contracts. So the Menda contract as put here is up to 5 slots. Right now, those slots would not be covered at that right now. We have 3 students who would be going there for next year, starting in the fall. And then I only have 1 at Ombudsman for the fall. So right now our numbers are low. These are what the max could be if we send more students. The average number of students we had last year was 8 in terms of how many students were there. And it varied by month because all students don't do the entire year there at the schools. Did I get all of those questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. So procedurally, we have the Menda contract that's been seconded, so we will, any questions of Ms. Parker? Ready to vote on this one? Okay, we have a roll, you have a question?
Yes. We're just so I can understand it. So Menda's or Ombudsman's for credit recovery, mainly that's part of that more junior seniors, I'm assuming. So before it gets to that point, have we identified why that's happening? Do we know from sophomore year or from junior year? I just wonder if there's a better way to spend our resources than paying this dollar amount, right? As opposed to identifying an issue early on in the child's career, so we're not paying for it and send them off campus, which might be social. I don't know, it might be a social problem. It might not be academic. So I'm wondering, how does that tie into what we're doing? Because this is a solution, I get it, but it can't be the only solution, right?
No, and this is the, from after the induction of our BEP, our numbers that we send to Menda have drastically decreased because at one point, we were servicing students as alternative to suspension, even more at Menda. We don't have as many students going. Like I said, if we started with 1, we ended the year with 11. It varied throughout all of the months because students, again, aren't always sent there for the entire year. So students who are there for the year have some type of interventions that have not serviced them throughout our school. So we have tried different interventions through our NCSS, working them through the tiered structures, through our tracking with our PSS teams, and they are just not showing success. And rather than keep them in the environment, not showing success and letting the credits lapse until their junior, senior year, we're trying to make sure that we're strengthening that here at the school first. So it's not the first place that we think to do. We do the interventions first. And sometimes it becomes that last resort where we're just like, if we're not servicing them here, it doesn't make sense to still stunt that and keep them in the school building. And you are right, at times it is a social thing. This is a very large school that has a lot of freedoms that doesn't work for a lot of students in terms of that self-discipline to make yourself get to all those places that you need to get to earn the credits. And I have been referring to Ombudsman as credit recovery, but of course, at Menda, they are recovering credits too. There's just the wraparound social services that are into that program in terms of just more tracking of students there that lends itself to some of those interventions continuing once we get there.
All right, that, I appreciate that response.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just, because credit recovery, I just keep thinking about pandemic when we were voting, was it 21? And the students were not on track. We had to make some adjustments.
Mhm.
Like, how did it get to that point where they're last school, you're like, man, now we gotta get these kids to pass, right?
Correct.
So what are the interventions? I guess like just my ignorance, like what are we doing prior to from
Mhm.
freshman, sophomore, junior, so it's not senior, oh, man, these kids are not gonna graduate.
Absolutely.
So,
And do
that's-
remember, we
right.
have in-school credit recovery too.
Right.
So these students have had access to that before we're thinking a smaller setting is going to help for the student in terms of,
Right.
and again, in-school credit recovery still requires you to get to that space and actually get into that environment to do that. But that has been done as well as other interventions. And we can definitely give a list of like what the interventions are before that.
I feel I'm just trying to also understand, like, why is there a need for so much credit recovery? Like, why does a kid even need credit recovery? Like, what happens? Is it failing a class? Is it missing a class? Is it school? Like, what? Like, why is it there, right? Because I get why we need it, but why is it so prevalent? It's a certain demographic, a certain age. I just don't understand. I want to see the bigger picture of it,
Right.
so we can know how we can address as a board, as a school district, to make sure that kids can serve properly. Because if not, this shouldn't be a trend that continues. I mean, grades should go down in time, but it shouldn't be a trend that continues where we're seeing constant credit recovery, need for credit recovery. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Mhm.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, may we please have a roll call?
Mr. Henry,
Yes.
Mr. Martieri,
yes,
Ms. Spivey,
Yes.
Dr. Maharaj,
Yes.
Mr. Arkin,
Yes.
Mr. Costa.
Yes. And I move to approve the Ombudsman Alternative Education Service Agreement and Transportation, the amount of $75,807. May I have a second, please?
Second.
Any comments on this? May we please have a roll?
Mr. Martieri,
yes,
Ms. Spivey,
Yes.
Dr. Maharaj,
Yes.
Mr. Arkin,
Yes.
Mr. Henry,
Yes.
Mr. Costa.
Yes. And we're gonna take a little bit of a loop back to the personnel report and what was approved there, Dr. Johnson.
Yes, so I drove right past that a little too quickly, and we have a new dean at OPRF, who was just recently approved by the board. Thank you very much. We'll begin next school year. She's here, and she is a former OPRF graduate. So I invite, well, Linda, if you want to introduce her quickly, and please come to the podium as well.
We are happy to present Ms. Marquita Thompson, a 2004 graduate of Oak Harbor Memorial High School, who is joining us as a dean, replacing Ms. Bishop, who is moving up into a different position at the school. So we're very happy to have her, and thanks for joining us tonight, Ms.
Thank you all for having me. It's so nice to meet all of you. I'm happy to be back in this building. I'm coming to you from School District P46. So I've been there since I started my teaching career in 2013. I am a dean there. Well, I'm a dean here now, but I just finished up my role as a dean there. So I'm looking to continue that work here at Oak Harbor Forest High School. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Welcome back.
Took up that enough.
I move to approve the ISBE Discipline Improvement Plan for school year 2021-22.
Second.
Any narrative on this?
Not much of a narrative. This is something that has existed for a little bit in various forms, but this is required now, approved from the board. And this really is a recap of the information we've already presented to the board as we discuss the changes that we're making for next school year to the behavior education plan. So, Ms. Parker, I don't know if you have anything else you want to share. Feel free, but don't feel out.
Just to say that our CCB was instrumental in some of the help with the BEP in order for us to get a together and put in a document like this to explain the changes that have happened in order to serve our students of color better at our school, as well as our entire student population.
Any questions, comments? May we please have a roll call?
Mr. Henry,
Yes.
Mr. Arkin,
Yes.
Mr. Martieri,
yes,
Ms. Spivey,
Yes.
Dr. Maharaj,
Yes.
Mr. Kopsky.
Yes. Item K, I move to approve the contract with Boone Entertainment for Homecoming 2022 in the amount of $39,116. May I please have a second?
Second.
Questions? May we please have a roll?
Mr. Martieri,
yes,
Mr. Arkin,
Yes.
Mr. Henry,
Yes.
Ms. Spivey,
Yes.
Dr. Maharaj,
Yes.
Mr. Kopsky.
Yes. Item L, I move to approve FGMA project authorization number 8 in the amount not to exceed $1.1 million and ask for a second.
Second.
All right, thank you. So similar to how we handled project authorization for project 2, this is just to clarify exactly what this is. This is to continue the schematic design work, complete the schematic design work for the field conversations that we're doing right now. And understanding that this is not an authorization for that actual work. It's a contract with the architects. And so, Ron, I don't know if there's anything else you and or FGMA want to say by way of introduction. Otherwise, we can open it to questions. Actually, I am going to jump in and say one more thing really quickly, sorry. And that is that the exact scope of the work that's cited here for the overall for the fields is roughed out here at 17 million. And even this week, the scope of what that work might be has gone under fairly significant revisions as we have delved a little bit more deeply into the implications of Title IX legislation on how we construct a baseball field in ways that parallel what we can offer them over at Woodland Common. So the 17 million is kind of the high end scope of it at this point. But again, that's going under significant review at this point. So we should not consider that as the absolute definitive cost for the field discussed several times now. So with that said, Rob, my apologies, it's all yours.
And also I would like to mention that sometimes people fail to realize that the 7.25% also encompasses the civil engineering, landscaping, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, the fire protection, structural consultant fees. All those fees come out of FGM fees. FGM pays all those out of their fees. So 7.25 don't go all to FGM. Any questions?
I have an ignorant question about the Title I thing.
Sure.
Do you mind? I just don't know anything about sports. I'm sorry. So at high school, baseball is baseball all boys and softball is all girls. Is that how it's set up?
Exactly.
And if girls wanted to play baseball, could they?
You know, that's a good question. I don't know the exact answer to that, but I know that girls have, there's a practice of them, they play football, for example. And so I don't know if we've had that situation here or in previous districts.
Well, and we have trans students and non-binary students
Absolutely.
and so on. So I'm just wondering how Title IX affects this and why we have single sex sports teams. You don't have to resolve this now, but I was just wondering. So,
Yeah, I understand.
it was a question.
But you're right.
Other questions?
Too.
Fred, for you?
Yeah, I just have a kind of an overarching comment. And what concerns me, we're in a position now where we're in an extreme inflationary period that I will say most people may not have ever experienced before. Okay, I was just having a discussion about that and a coffee this morning. And what concerns me, about a percentage professional contract, all right, is that when you have the contract based on costs and you're in an inflationary period, what I'm struggling with is, the amount of work that has to be done if this were to cost, it were a year and a half ago and it would cost $11 million versus the amount of work that has to be done tomorrow at $17 million. Basing it on construction costs that have been inflated, to me, I just have this problematic thoughts about it. And I'm not saying that, I'm not demeaning the profession of architecture or how they charge or anything like that. But, to me, it would be more like a time and materials type of situation. Because we ran into this before when we were doing tennis courts. I mean, it seems to me that the scope of work that has to be done for a track and for baseball fields, and I understand that it's there's still a lot of engineering that has to go on, landscape and all that kind of thing. But still, I mean, the actual work, and if you guys can explain to me the difference between that and designing a building. All right, it's fields, it's a track. It just seems to me that it would be, from an architecture point of view, a much different scenario than what we just finished with designing. In addition, a 3-story addition to the building. And that's where this is where I'm struggling with this. And then once you answer that, I have one other question.
Sure. So let's start with.
Make sure we're on the mic.
Let's start with what always appears to be a simple project on the surface, and realize that we're going far underground actually to engineer the project, starting with underground water detention that's required by the local governing bodies relative to stormwater management. And so there is a sizable system that has to be developed in order to manage that stormwater that will be underneath the main playing field, which the track will be around. Secondly, there are associated buildings relative to almost all this work that has electrical and some component of heat relative to them. There is the design of retaining walls, as the site is not flat. And those walls need to be structurally engineered. There's areas of paving, there's areas of turf, there's areas of landscaping. So there's a lot of very different components when you look at the scale and scope of this track and field, or this track and fields project, as opposed to, for example, just simply say if we were resurfacing the Lake Street field. There's lighting associated with these fields. So there's electrical distribution, new panel system, new distribution, electrical distribution that has to be designed. There is communication and technology infrastructure that is associated with all of these things. So there's a lot of different components that are required for this work that takes a lot of coordination and a lot of just management to get all adults coordinate their work completely.
You are correct that there is not the complication of having to deal with the existing building though, and that is part of the factor where this fee percentage is a little bit lower than what was there for the roofing work. This project is very heavy on civil design. the civil engineers, so the fees that we are paying out to civil engineers are exponentially higher than you would on any other project, really. So that is a factor in it. There is less on the actual architecture. FGM's personal work is much smaller on the buildings that are being done. So part of our job is to make sure that every single one of those disciplines is fully coordinated and the delivery matches what the client expectations are. So there's that factor in what we're doing. But like Ron said, the fee encompasses our work and all of the fees we're paying out to all of the other consultants who have a bigger role on this than they normally do.
And if I could just address one more question, which was the associated inflationary cost of things. That's part of the reason that there's a maximum associated with this. And if the construction cost is lower, the fee will be lower. But if the construction costs were for some reason to go higher than this, our fee is capped. Secondly, yes, we are in an inflationary time period. As a board member of the firm, I can tell you that our salaries are going up, our healthcare costs are going up, our transportation costs relative to employees travel to and from project sites is gone up astronomically with the price of gas. And so we're experiencing the same kind of inflation that everybody experiences, whether we're not actually buying groceries, obviously, but we are associating many increases in costs relative to what we're experiencing as well.
My other question, my second question.
Yes.
Has to do with the construction. As we get into the bid processes on this and other projects as we go forward, can we get from our contractors guaranteed maximum costs? Can we get those built in to those contracts? I think that ought to be something that we ought to be looking at routinely, so that we have control of what our costs are going to be on projects as we go forward. And then if there are changes, those changes obviously would have to come to the board for an approval.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we can approach projects in that manner. There are certain limitations relative to the public bidding requirements.
Right.
But we can manage that through a process where you have control over any of contingency amounts and allowances.
So that gave me a question about my head as you were talking about like material. So when we do our bids, is the labor material contract or is just what is the cost to do vaccinations? What I'm wondering is there an opportunity for us to buy our own material for certain things to save that cost of the markup, whether it's piping, conduit, whatever it is?
There are certain things that are able to be purchased through state contract, and we've had those discussions with the district in the past on some other projects, and that's certainly something that we can take a look at as we move forward in the process, in what goes out to bid and what may be potentially purchased through state contract. We can absolutely take a look at that.
Because that'll be a cost saving there, because I know there's an allowance for you to price plus percentage for securing it, but if we buy our own, control the cost of material to an extent, that'll save us cost.
Yeah, and with those where there's generally educational discounts available when purchasing that way, and like, as you said, you would save on some of the markup on the construction side of things, so.
Okay. So we get that through state contracts and cooperatives as well. And one more thing with your question, Fred, when we get out a project, that is the guarantee, that's the guarantee maximum before we come back to the board. So if anything hits that bid threshold and it's gonna be above what the bid was, we have to come back to board approval. If it's something, a change order that's over 10% of the project, we have to come back to board approval. So we can't.
Right, but I think what I heard was that we can do it structured in such a way that those change orders within the contingency would have to come back to the board?
You know, that will mean we have to stop a project, so say for instance.
No, I understand,
We
but if it's
wasn't-
something, we can talk about that too, on a contract by contract basis as to, what percentage or something.
Right.
So
In
then that
terms
would
of
be
size and
separate from
scope.
our contract, that would be as you work out the construction contract, details of that. I
Right.
mean, you can work with your lawyer on what you want to put into that for sure.
Because as I'm sure the board is very well aware, for example, on any project like this that involves a large amount of work in field areas, we're gonna be doing borings that will tell us in general what the quality of soils are and things like that. But as you get into it and specifically start to excavate large areas, just because you have a boring here and a boring here, what's in between could be entirely different. So there will be allowances and contingencies that are built into the contract to deal with those things. And we can structure those in a way that they have to come back to the board for approval. And obviously, those costs would be justified if there was something that showed up to be different.
You're referring to if the soil is different to do geotechnical analysis, you mean if the
Correct.
soil is different, or still to do more reinforcement? So that,
Correct.
okay, that makes sense.
If you have an area, we actually just put out the request for proposal for geotechnical. If you have an area that is outside of where one of those boards was, we did a lot, we were asking for a lot of them. Somewhere north of 50. But if there's an area that there's a surprise because you can't do every single one, there's allowances for how to handle the way to handle dealing with poorer soils that may not have shown up that you weren't aware of.
Somewhere in our files, are there any geotech reports? I'm just curious.
Geotechnical are the borings, they go,
Right.
and we did do a couple we request them for every project that we do. We did some for the South Cafeteria SRC that we haven't found and the district has copies of. We also did them for the tennis courts. And we are now requesting them for the areas for these projects. And we also issued the same for potential for project 2 so that we can understand what that looks like as we go through schematic design to understand if there's any implications to structural costs on that.
And can you talk a little bit about, there was mention of geothermal. Talk about, because I think that has to go to sustainability of what that portion of a project might look like. I know it's not what we're asking for, and it's not in there yet, but can you kind of just talk to us a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. We've begun the process of figuring out what we could potentially put over there, what could be accommodated. As Jim mentioned, there's stormwater requirements that will have to go below the west field. And then what else could be available to do geothermal? There are schedule implications, what can be accomplished from a schedule perspective. What would we be able to get from an output perspective from those wells, and what would be the needs of project 2, the south end of the building, the overall building. So we're doing those investigations and we're in the middle of that process. We plan to come back to the board with a detailed report next month on that. And we're also investigating the cost implications of just the wells, because obviously if you're going to do the wells out here in the west field, then we need to be incorporated into this work that's being done on the west field. So in advance of any decisions about funding for project 2. So we are actively working on that, and we're hopeful that it is looking promising, but we don't want to give any detailed information before I don't want to give you any half-baked
You gotta
information.
kind of explain in layman's terms what the vision would be of what we're actually talking about.
Sure.
So for starters, basic idea behind geothermal is that we use the heat available in the earth and cooling, depending on season, to heat and cool the building. And the way that is done is by creating a field of wells. And there's a variety of different configurations those can take that are different depths that are different spacings based on different depths. We've already looked at sort of a 300-foot deep well at 10 feet on center. We're looking now at 500 feet deep wells at 20 feet on center. We're working in concert with a drilling company that actually drills these wells so that they can provide us much more technical information associated with this. That heating or cooling is used in a system of heat pumps that then provide the actual heating and cooling for the space, and that would be roof mounted.
And we're also requesting information to see if there's any grant funds available for sustainability. So I reached out to ComEd and a few that we're partnering with our sustainability items to find out if there's any funding available.
And as a result of this, you know, our goal then would be the reduction of our carbon footprint is correct, as it is.
No,
Correct.
I'll throw in, Fred, I wish we had done geothermal when we bought our house, we looked into it, and it was one of those things where if we put it in and we were there for 20 years, it might not have paid for itself. If we were there for 40 years, it would have. And so if we're thinking long-term, it seems like for the school, this is definitely worth exploring, right? So,
And when we bring this information back to you, it'll come with the information about payback periods and the actual costs.
can I have a question about the turf? Is that all right?
Sure.
So, while we're on sustainability, I know the plan is to use turf, and do we use turf in our other fields already? We do. So I tried to do some research on this. It was a little tough because when you do grass versus turf, you get many ads essentially from companies that sell turf. But eventually I found Global Sports Matters, which had a good breakdown, gave average cost per hour of use, and natural grass is more expensive. Over the life of it, they're giving essentially average cost per hour use of $91.20 for grass versus $25.07 for turf. So there's a clear economic savings to turf, but there are some ecological questions. And so my understanding is that turf often breaks down in ways that are potentially hazardous to people in the field. It also is not as good at absorbing heat as grasses, which can be a difficulty for players, like in hot summer, etc. And so I'm wondering if you have a sense of, and according to this, newer turfs often have better cooling and what's the other one? It was better cooling features and
also better composition.
And better composition, better more water permeability, which is another big issue with older turf, is that the water would be running off and not getting into the soil. So if you could just address how much all of that's factoring into your decisions here.
Sure. So the primary decision though really comes down to the heavy use of the fields. Because the truth of the matter is, given the use that the district would have of these fields, you wouldn't have much grass.
So it
would be a lot of dirt. And so that is really the primary reason that school districts are going to turf for their athletic fields. It's just the amount of use that they get and the fact that there is no season for them to really recover at all.
I'll just also add really quickly to that, just two things about this campus specifically. Number one, you asked a question about our current fields, and so everybody can kind of have a feel for what that is. Our current football stadium, Lake Street, and Ridgeland Common, our district, they are all turf right now. The backfield is grass, and we had several times this past spring semester, so this is the second week now. We had several times this past spring semester where both softball and baseball games needed to be either delayed or canceled or moved to a visitor situation where it should have been a home competition as a result of the fields just not being in a situation where they were ready to play, right? Because because they were super, right? From where we had. So those are just some of the motivating factors. So it's a primary one that you named, which doesn't get to the ecological focus of your question.
And there's also just one other thing I forgot to mention, is that injuries are higher on turf than on grass as well, right? So there's the NFL did a study and, 68% higher rate of ankle injuries on turf and so on and so forth. So I don't know, maybe grass just isn't possible, given the usage that we're seeing. Just want to raise the question.
As I said, the primary reason is because the grass won't last. But also, obviously, all turf manufacturers are highly sensitive to the fact of sustainability and sort of the ecological kind of equation of what they're producing and putting in. And that has improved just enormously year after year, particularly in the last 10 years. When it first came out, turf as they put it into the Astrodome back in the day, was not a very positive experience, I don't think, for anybody. This was essentially laid on almost concrete, and it was about the hardest surface you can imagine. It was totally impermeable and was made of stuff that was highly carcinogenic. And luckily, all of that stuff is gone now. And we have much better products today that are being designed and manufactured and installed in much more sustainable approaches.
Sarah?
Actually asked most of my questions, but one, and I don't expect to answer this evening, but one thing, of course, that's pretty sensitive for us is the timing of the project, given our need begins at a very specific date. And so while I'm a big fan of geothermal and I'm hoping that that's something we do, I imagine that would add a considerable amount of time to the project itself.
It is one of the most significant factors that we are looking into, and we just had a call with Nicole and with and we're working with the contractor, the driller that we talked about, and our internal team and with the district to figure out exactly what can be done and how we can address any, if we do move forward, how to address in the way that we did this, a protection for the schedule. So in all likelihood, if we do it, it would be bid as an ad alternate, so that the district, with the caveat that they have to prove in their scope reviews that they can meet the district's schedule, so that when you go to approve, if you do, you know that they guaranteed that they can meet the schedule that the district requires.
And there are many more scheduled meetings that could happen in the very near future.
Good, Sarah?
Yes, thank you.
My questions, I think they've been addressed, but first, Ron, a couple things that just came up, just so that we make sure we put them in the right place, which is when we're talking about contract for for purchasing materials and such like that, there's been some things that have been talked about that we need to make sure we don't lose sight of. Management of contingency and such. So
I'm sorry, can I ask, did the village, I lost track of this, did the village approve the lighting, or are we still waiting on that?
Not yet, our special use permit has been submitted.
Yes. Next meeting is on the 21st.
my question, I similar to what Fred talked about the fee structure, et cetera. My concern is that one, you said the price of, we have not yet been presented a plan.
That's right.
Right, of what this is and what amenities are in there that the board can even stomach. So we're kind of today being asked to approve a percentage of something that we've not seen and had a chance to approve. So that's a concerning thing, with which is what indeed then sets a maximum that is in the item that's on the agenda. So I am concerned about just that and the timing, with the recognition that we do have timing and we want to move forward. I guess the question I have is, could we proceed on a fee? What would it look like if we proceeded with this on a fee, a fee structure that was based on time and materials from FJ&A?
We would need to come back to another meeting to present a different contract, and which would delay our beginning design, which is, as we were actually already hoping to begin design at the end of June. We could certainly come back to that. I think in all likelihood, it would cost the district more to do it on TNF. It normally does. TNF is better applicable on very low cost things than on bigger projects.
Because I mean, it just based on the resource pool at $1.1 million, you're talking the equivalent of like 3 people full time, right? 3 people, a full year's work at $200 an hour is what it kind of backs into for this project, which I don't know.
I mean, accepting the fees for the various engineers and everything, right?
Yeah, I know. I mean, I'm just, that's back of envelope. Yes, you're parceling it out and.
And the management of that person, right?
Yeah.
Or persons.
So that would have to be the fee structure would not be that which is in the appendices.
The fee structure right now is 7.25% of construction. The not to exceed was based on 17 million. We could certainly circle back when we have the scope finalized and an updated budget to see if we need to adjust that not to exceed. If the scope comes down significantly, the budget comes down significantly, we can certainly do that. What you'd be approving today is to allow us to start the design work to proceed on the percentage basis.
I think what you're referring to though is exhibit C that was attached to the agenda here, which it talks about hourly rates. And so I guess the question is, would those hourly rates, if we were to go a different route, be based off of what we see in exhibit C, or is that a different approach?
Yeah, those would be our hourly rates. They do not include the hourly rates of the engineering consultants.
So what I did here is if the scope, which has not been defined, does change, if it lowers.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't done with the Title IX work that we have in front of us. Lowering the 17 million is very realistic. It's almost guaranteed from that 17 figure that we have. The geothermal is the X factor, right? Because that's an additional cost that would raise this project, back to or above what we see here. So that would be brought to the board, like you said, in various additional options that would lead to improvement as time. I think the factor that is critical here for us as a district is to weigh, in addition to the conversation, it's a cost of time analysis. We have time in front of us right now that we need to utilize as best we can to move this down the field, I guess, no pun intended, to help us get ready for a bid process, which needs to open up in the fall in order to get us ready for the beginning of construction, which would tentatively right now be somewhere in the area of, mid-late springish. And so I just want to make sure that as we debate the question of cost here, that you're bringing it up, we are also doing our due diligence to consider the time that we are under here due to the constraint we have for our needs for a traffic.
You know, we could proceed under a time and materials basis, given sort of the miscellaneous consulting arrangement we have. That would allow us to proceed forward right away.
Could you clarify what you mean by that? So
So-
an additional contract, in other words, would not be.
Yeah.
An additional contract would not be needed under the miscellaneous consulting agreement or amendment. We essentially bill for miscellaneous services on an hourly basis. And we could do that and do the consultants as a pass through within that. And revisit this at a later date or not at all, depending on, you know, how things shook out. I mean, the real reason to do it with the max, obviously, is if for some reason the project got more complicated or more involved or something happened during construction or whatever, and we end up spending more time, the district is protected having that maximum amount, but which is generally why clients don't like open-ended
So
hourly billings.
So thinking about what Tom was asking, can it be a time and material with a not to exceed on that?
Yes. Yeah, and at this point, the not to exceed would be the not to exceed that's in the proposed amendment, but again, I visited as soon as we know more about what the final scope is.
So the not to exceed would remain intact. The way that we would accrue the cost of this would be through an hourly rate rather than a percentage of potential costs for the project.
No, I mean,
I just wanna- I just wanna clarify the option.
if that's a question, if that would be then we would need to amend the motion. Right now, we're just kind of discussing. And right now, the motion is to approve the contract as it is, which is on a 7.25% of cost based on a number and a not to exceed. And so the question is, would we want to entertain amending that to be flipping over to a time and materials approach? And then the other point, I'm just trying to, it was we don't yet know what the final, I mean, there's a lot of motion right now on the cost. The one thing we know for sure is we want to be able to keep moving. Okay, so from this discussion, we want to be able to do the work. So that one, I think, is pretty clear. The question is, how do we want to spend the money? So, Sarah? Okay.
I just have no idea how we make that assessment as to what's going to be better for the district, absent all of the information that we're missing. That in no sense, but we need a lot of additional information to determine what's the most cost effective. So what I'm kind of wondering is, can we start out as time and materials until we get those other pieces, and then from there make a decision? Because presumably we'd have those other pieces in the next month or two, I would think. That might be a way to have our cake and eat it too, if that's what we want to do.
And by other information, I just want to make sure, I'm sure we're talking about the actual scope of the project.
Right, the scope,
But
I
then we know
mean,
what the number is.
What the
how
type- what-
do we know, 7.25
pieces are.
what?
Right.
We can absolutely push it that way.
And as at the contract we're approving, that's already part of the contract on the miscellaneous, you said?
Yeah, one of the previously approved amendments is a provision for miscellaneous services that allows the district to pay us to do minor things that, just take a few hours here and there. And we actually have been doing the preliminary work for this project under that service, so we would continue to bill in that manner. For as long as the district wanted us to proceed in that manner.
So if we did that, though, we wouldn't need any approvals
We
tonight,
wouldn't have
we would just
approved.
come back
So we
with
would
the
just-
second
So what we're,
phase.
right, so I think what I think I'm hearing is the decision on this amendment, what is it, number 8? Okay.
Authorization.
Authorization 8 would be tabled. I'm just trying to make sure I understand what it is so we can determine the action. We would proceed under prior authorizations of spending on a time and materials basis. And at this point, really not without a limit, because this limit wouldn't apply, but we're not gonna go that far down the road.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
And then once we have a better picture of things, we can then reopen up authorization 8 to get and have a better picture.
Absolutely, that's a path.
Would that come back the next board meeting on the 28th?
Potentially we'll do later.
Our next board meeting is actually in August, on August,
Oh,
the
you don't
committee
meet
of the
on the
whole
28th.
meeting. We don't have a second meeting in July. And so I'm not gonna commit to a specific board meeting at this point.
I
I'll
will
give
share this in the
yeah.
schedule conversation that we were talking about. The goal is to put this out to bid somewhere around the end of September, beginning of October, the absolute latest.
Yeah.
Because we need to get board approval. The biggest factor in this is with the stormwater and the MWRD, and their permit process, we understand it's taking up to 6 months, and we would not be able to break ground until we have approval from them. So we need to get that application in, and that needs to be final documents in time to have their approval to break ground when you need to. So that is kind of the time frame of when we would be finishing documents.
We also need to monitor thresholds, because in order to protect the board, I want to make sure that we don't hit that do not exceed amount. And then the project comes in lower, but we've already paid this amount, so we'll be.
Yeah, thanks. Rob, I have a question that I want to put on that same point. Just, I think it might be presumed by some of the room, but I want to make it explicit. That the hourly rate with the current contract that we have with you, if we were to go that path, the funds that we would pay out for that, talk about the relationship between that payout, of course, and then if we switch down the road to the 7.25%, how do those two relate to each other? Just be explicit.
Essentially, anything that you would have been billed and paid us for prior to that amendment would then be credited against the fee that would be in the amendment.
Okay.
So the real risk then, so the question is when, and how quickly, because the further we go,
Right.
the more likelihood we could, spend more than we have. So we're talking what, within the next 60 days or thereabouts?
You would want to, before we go out to bid, absolutely.
So, and just trying to get a time frame. So this is like, that, because then we'll answer some of these questions.
That's right.
What is
For
it?
clarification, in there, the breakdown of how we were going to bill on 7.25%, 75% of the fee is the cost that we would accrue during construction documents, would be that time between now and the end of September. When we would need to put it out to bid. So the big bulk of your cost is the amount of time our team needs to invest, ourselves and consultants, in that period of time.
Obviously, we would like to come back to the board sooner rather than later, but saying a specific date at this time without knowing exactly how we're gonna resolve the some of the scope issues would be putting the cart before the horse.
Yeah, I mean, the August regular meeting is on the 25th, I think. 25th, Thursday the 25th. It's possible by that date for sure.
Yeah.
We should target it.
Yes.
Yeah, August
And
25th.
that keeps us moving in the right direction. Okay, so I guess procedurally here, we have a motion that's on the table right now. And we can either still vote on it, or we can vote do we have to vote to table it?
Yeah, I would like to table it for now. I don't think we have enough information.
So.
And can I ask one more question? And it's one I've been wanting to ask. So you guys have a great relationship with us. You've done good work. and I respect the work you've done. So this is not about any of that, okay? Do we know how the rates you charge us compare like on a most favored nation basis to other large ongoing projects you have? Are we getting a most favored nation cost from you for continuing the relationship? Or would it behoove us, since this is a different project going outdoors, doesn't involve changing the building, to see if maybe another architect could do a job cheaper? I'm just asking the question.
Actually, you have a better understanding being on the board of different, I have my clients that I can reference, better than.
So what I would tell you is that our rates change on an annual basis. That sort of occurs in the fall every year based on increases in salaries and things like that. I think if you would check us against any comparable firm doing education work in the Chicago metro area, our rates are the same or lower. That's not gonna be every Tom, Dick, and Harry, just like you can find a pickup truck contractor who will have charged much lower rates than you would a large general contractor. But I think that is true of anybody who would be a comparable firm.
Okay, but how about, can you answer the one question then? How do the rates you charge us compare to the rates you charge other public sector entities you do the work for? Are we getting the best rates you charge, the lowest rates you charge, or are you charging others lower?
We don't have any lower rates. The rates are the rates are the rates are the rates.
But I think he is asking, like, different districts negotiate different things with, and I will tell you that of the districts that I am working with, you are getting the best rates.
Yeah, from an overall fee percent, yes.
I Googled it, we have to go to table.
Okay, so that would be thank you. So that means we need to have an amendment to the motion. So the motion, right, or,
No, I think we just moved to table the item.
okay, good, I'm all for shorter. And before we do, just not procedurally, but just sequentially, so tabling means that we will operate under a time and materials without any preset threshold, because that's not in there for this project, okay? Until we come back and revisit this motion. And when we do revisit this motion, we will have better clarity on scope and what the future is, and at which point we can then either choose to adopt what is it? I keep not amendment, but
Authorization.
Because of the eight. Okay. 8, I know it's 8. Okay, I'm a number more. Authorization 8, or we could continue on a time and materials basis, and we can do as we see fit. I'm getting net nods, yes. Ron?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, I understand now the table, and so
I think procedurally though, to add to what we just said, I think we have an open movement.
yeah, we have an open motion to approve this, so we need to override that with a motion to table it. So would you like to move?
Sure, I move that we table agenda item L.
Second.
Do I have a second? Okay, good. This is now,
I think it's just a majority.
we can talk about it, but this is a nested, all right, may we please have a roll on the amended motion to table the motion?
Mr. Arkin,
Yes.
Mr. Henry,
Yes.
Ms. Spivey,
Yes.
Dr. Mohawk,
Yes.
Mr. Martyri,
Yes.
Kowski.
Yes. So do we need to now do anything with the original motion, or did we already
So I think
table
It's
it?
not just,
Yeah.
All right, that was.
Do
Before,
you
yes,
need to
go,
do anything
right,
to
what?
officially give us notice to proceed with design? or we tabled the motion, but did we get official notice, motion to proceed? I just don't know.
I think the existing clearly a consensus, that the existing contract
Yes.
enables that action.
Okay.
Okay, yes, we are under that clear assumption. But wait,
Hold on, I just have a quick comment. And I don't know, I have no idea how geothermal works. But as you, just to keep in mind, as you go through the process in the planning, that if it comes to a point where we just can't do it, if there are elements or infrastructure that can be added to this project that allows it to go forward at a later date. So if there's, I don't know, conduit or whatever it might be that
One of
can
the
be
things
installed.
we are looking at the moment is that there might be certain wells that exist within the interior of the track, under the playing surface of the field. But we're also looking at wells that might be outside of that. And so that's where Allison was talking about doing alternates and having both of them be separate alternates, so that we could understand from a scheduling standpoint, which might be better or worse, and from a standpoint of, obviously, if you're doing the field and you're gonna put them under the field, you gotta do it now.
Right.
Whereas the one that's outside the field could be done at a later date.
Tiny little question, the stormwater issue, and the 6 months potential approval time on that, is it something where a commissioner might be able to push it through faster if they were so inclined? Because one of them is a colleague of mine, a former colleague of
If you
mine.
can help, you're welcome to try.
Okay, so just if it seems like it's an issue, I don't know whether they can or not, I have no idea, but I think there's an equity argument to be made here that they might be sympathetic to.
I would certainly never be someone who would tell you that any sort of political or personal relationship couldn't help a process. Doesn't necessarily mean it will,
Yeah.
okay,
but it might.
very good. Just, one last comment, and because what we've said is that it's, move full speed ahead. So, for, depending on that time, or that speed, it's just incumbent that we have a good mechanism for sharing, how fast we're spending money.
Right. That's what I was talking about when I said triggers.
Yes,
When-
so
when you hit certain levels.
that we just need that, so that we're tracking what we just did.
Absolutely understood, and that's,
All right,
yes.
very good, thank you. And now for something completely different. I move to approve the IGA for fiscal year 2022-23 with West 40 regarding the alternative learning opportunity program as presented. Any questions or discussion?
We don't have any presentation.
No presentation.
Dr. Fiorenza, excellent work today.
Yes, that's a very good, very clear presentation. Thank you. May we please have a roll?
Mr. Henry,
Yes.
Mr. Arkin,
Yes.
Dr. Monroe,
Yes.
Mr. Martyri,
Yes.
Ms. Spivey,
Yes.
Mr. Costa.
Yes. That completes the action items for today. Are there any future agenda items of note?
So I don't know if this is already on the agenda, but I want to be sure that COVID mitigation plans for the fall are going to be discussed soon.
Yes, we'll bring that forward to the committee meeting in August. We received new guidance from the state July, I think it came out on the 5th, most recently, which is largely completely, kind of reiterate the previous guidance, but
So I'd like to discuss shield testing.
Absolutely.
packaging, et cetera.
we'll bring it all up. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other? Yes.
One last thing, 'cause we talked about a couple of meetings. About the students that on the school year that didn't pass. I know we were waiting for the school year to end. I'm sorry.
Yep.
We're waiting for the school year to end for the students that did not pass. Right, so I know, you know, last time we get some information on those students.
Yeah, that is scheduled in our August meetings as well. Right on the agenda.
Thank you. Any other agenda items?
I would, and then not for the immediate future, but Greg, I've talked a lot about and Tom has mentioned it a couple of times, the policies that we passed on, the information that's supposed to be provided when contracts are presented to the board for approval. If we could just have that policy brought up and reviewed at the board level, maybe in sometime September, October-ish, and a discussion of how the administration is going to implement a procedure to comply with that going forward, so we know what to expect. I would like to have that discussion. It's probably no more than a 10 or 15-minute discussion, but it's getting everyone on the same page.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Very good.
I want to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All unsure?
There.
All right. Thank you, folks.
That was a career.